So in this video we are going to do a little watercolor sunset in the form of a Polaroid sized picture. And I have these pre-cut squares, and I have come in and drawn a 3 by 3 inch square inside on pre-cut watercolor paper. And so to do my watercolor, I have already taped one off here, and I'm going to stick it to my table. That way I can be really messy, because when we're doing sunsets we want to be able to do nice big washes. And I have pre-made some colors here, and next to me, whenever you're doing watercolor, you want to have a little paper towel and some scrap paper so you can test colors. So I have this old piece of watercolor paper that I like to test colors on, and I'm going to get started here. So in front of me I have made a purple, a blue, I have a little tiny bit of pinks and reds, and orange and yellow. So first thing I want is to draw in my water edge line. So I'm going to take my little ruler and very lightly with the pencil, I'm just going to draw in a line so I can see where the edge of my water is and where the sunset starts. And then the other thing I want to do is I'm going to draw in a little land where my palm tree is going to grow, because I'm going to have a little palm tree coming across the sunset here. Okay, so I always like to start with the lightest colors. And I have my silver brush here, which is a really nice brush. This is a mop brush, and it is a little bit on the expensive side, but you can use whatever brush you have at home. But I like this brush because it holds a lot of water. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-wet my paper. And anytime I'm doing a wet into wet wash, I want to wet the paper and saturate the paper evenly, but not to the point where if I were to pick it up, the water would run off. We don't want that. And so I'm just going to take a look at it here, and once the sheen has come off of it and it's not shiny anymore, that means that the paper then has absorbed most of that water, and that's what we want. There's a magical moment between where the paper is still damp and before it gets to dry, and that is the moment that we want to do our washes. So I'm just going to wait a minute. As I can see, it's pretty dry. Now if you put too much water on your paper, you can go ahead and blot some of that out. We don't want it to be running all over the place. We want controlled wetness. So I'm going to just go ahead and try and see what it looks like here. I'm going to switch to a kind of small brush. Since I'm doing such a tiny painting, I'm going to go ahead and just use a tiny brush. And I've pre-made this yellow. And in order to have a nice sunshine as the sun sets, I'm going to leave a little tiny area of white. Now, if you don't, and I'm going to show you what it looks like if you don't. If I accidentally come in and put all that in and I don't have the little whiteness, it won't have that flare. So how do you fix that? Well, you take a little tiny piece of paper towel and you can just blot out while it's still wet. You can lift pretty much anything out. So you see how it goes back to white? That's what we want. So that is how you fix things. So I'm going to come in with my yellow, and sometimes we have a little yellow on the water as a reflection. So I'm going to do a little yellow down where the water is. And I might even want to just get a little bit brighter. So I'm going to tap into my yellow here, and towards the edge, it's going to start transitioning into the orange. So it's okay if you go too far, because the orange will just pick up that color and it'll blend together, and you never really know what your color is going to look like when you're done. So I'm just going to come in with the orange now, and I'm being careful not to go too much into that yellow because I want to leave that little bright area. And as long as your paper is still wet, it will dry and blend together and look really nice. So I'm just going to pick up a little more paint to make it a little darker so I have a more intense sunset here. And I'm going to just put some of that in while my paper is still wet. And you notice that since I'm doing wet into wet, some of the color starts working its way into other areas. And I really like that effect. I'm just going to put a little orange down on the water, and then I'm going to go into my purples. And just going to bring some purple up into the sky here. And while it's still wet, hopefully your paper hasn't dried yet. If your paper is dried, go ahead and take a big brush and just re-wet the whole thing. And then I'm going to do some blues at the top. So while that's still wet, I can come back in and just streak in some of these other colors. Now, next to me, I have some little pieces of paper towel. And this is really fun. You can play with just doing a blue wash and making little clouds. So now if you were to take a little crumpled up paper towel and you did a blue wash and you dabbed on it, you'd get this effect. Right, so you have your little clouds. This is very fun for beginners to make these little clouds. So on my sunset, I'm just going to pull out a few little clouds here. And I'm just, while it's still wet, you can get back to the white paper. And I'm going to make a little clouds just like this. And maybe taking out some of that color. Now, it should get softer as we go here, and all the colors start blending together and they start drying. So I'm going to come in and make a nice bright white cloud right here and one over here, and I'm trying to keep them kind of organic shaped. It's a little harder to do when you have tiny paintings, so you have to just try and make tiny little cloud shapes. All right, and maybe there's a few in the distance here, so. And it's starting to dry, so I like the look of that. So I'm going to let that dry now. And meanwhile, I'm going to go work on my water. So I already had this blue made up. And I'm going to just go ahead and add a little bit of a darker blue to it and make it a little more intense so that my water is nice and rich. And anytime we do water, the water in the distance is the darkest, and it gets lighter as it comes to us. So that horizon line will be our dark area, and some of it's going to kind of go up into the sky a little bit, and that's okay. Hopefully your orange is dry. You really want to wait for that to dry. And then I'm just going to pull some waves into my little sunset area. And I'm going to paint the whole thing in blue, just like so. I'm being careful not to go over my reflection too much. And don't worry too much if it bleeds here, because we're going to come back in and put some little, like a little mountain range around the back. So here, I'm going to bring it in. I want to have little reflections of waves coming through where the sun's setting, so I don't want to fill that in all the way. Just like so. And you might even want to switch to a smaller brush, that's okay. I'm just going to use my fingernail, and I'm going to dab out a little bit of little white rocky waves here, just to pull a little color out while it's drying. And then I'm going to come back in with my darker blue and paint the rest. So now while that's drying, I'm going to mix up a nice dark blue-black. And I'm going to go ahead and use black in this one because I want my color to be super dark. And a lot of times with watercolor, you have to paint and then just let it dry. So I'm going to wait while that's drying and just mix up some paint here. So now I've gone into the black, but I also want a dark blue. So I'm going to add a little blue to this. And I have this nice, really dark blue. So I'm going to put a little blue in my black. And you could do a brown black too. That always looks really nice. Makes up kind of a nice sunset shadowy color here. And that will be what I paint all my little mountain ranges with, and eventually my palm tree on the top. Okay, so now I'm going to go back in the water while it's still a little bit damp. And I'm going to get a darker tone here. And I'm mixing it into my blue. I'm just making my blue a little darker. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to darken up that horizon line just like so. And I think I might even switch to a tinier brush if I have one. Okay, here's a nice little tiny brush. And this is a very tiny Winsor Newton here. And I'm going to come in and just paint some little waves, just like this. And don't worry too much about where your paint's blurring together. Any watercolor we're supposed to have a little fun with. It's supposed to be magical and run together. So I'm going to just paint some waves, just like this, pulling a little bit into where my sun is reflecting. And towards the front here. And this side was still really wet, so I was letting it dry a little bit. Okay. And now while that's drying, I'm going to go back up into my sunset. And I'm going to put just a little bit of shadow on the clouds. So I'm going to use the same blue, just a little bit more watered down. I'm going to go underneath my clouds and just dab in some little shadows, just to give them some depth. Just like so. You want to be kind of random with your movements. Try and make the clouds look realistic. And we'll just give them a little shadow and a little depth here. And I'm going to come in and put a little darker blue at the sky level, just like that. And I have this pink color that I made. I'm going to see what this looks like if I put little streaks of pink up in the sky here. I'm just putting little streaks. And I'm going to come in with my wet, just clear wet brush now. Nothing but water on here. And I'm going to soften in all those little streaks I just did. And blur them into my painting, because I wanted a little more pink up in there. And the same thing down here at the bottom. I feel like it needs a little darker orange. So I'm going to go in and get a little bit darker orange. And that's looking pretty thick, so I'm going to make sure I have enough water in there. And I'm just going to come in and again put in a few little streaks here of some orange, just like that. And anywhere it's too sharp of an edge, you just want to go into clear water, right? Nothing but water. And you're just going to soften that up with just clear water, just like that. And you just kind of go in there under the clouds just like so. Now I can see I got a little blue. This happens a lot. You'll pull up a little bit of the blue. So I'm just going to use a damp brush and wipe that off, just like that. And I'm dabbing my paper towel. I'm just going to pull that out a little bit. And what else? I'll put a little more purple. Again, I'm just fiddling with it so that my water can dry. So up in the sky here, I'm going to come in and put a little darker purple tones, just for fun. And again, I'm going to soften them up with a wet brush, just like so, underneath that little cloud there. Just like that. All right, so now my water is pretty dry. I'm going to come in with a fairly dark blue, and I've switched to a darker, what I like to call ocean blue. And I'm going to come in again. I'm going to just darken up that back line. Just like so. And I'm going to pull some of that up into the front. Now we don't want to go all the way into the front because we want our ocean to be darker in the background. And I'm using a tiny brush. If you do a big painting, you can really have a lot of fun kind of mushing all the colors together. But tiny paintings require a little more control. Just like that. Just going to get some little waves here. And my paper is still just a little bit wet, so it will have a softening effect. Just like that. Now, while it's still damp, I want to make this little area right here more of a light reflection. So I just have clear water on my paper right now and on my brush. Clear water on my brush. And I dab it off on the paper towel every time. And I'm just going to re-moisten that little area. And then I'm going to come back in with my little paper towel and just pull out some of that color just lightly. Just like so. Very nice. Okay. Now I'm going to go up in my sky again. And a lot of times watercolor is just moving back and forth. You want to always work in the dry areas if you're changing colors. So I'm just going to add a little glow on the top of these clouds here. Something's shining down on them here, a little pink, just like this. And they're picking up a little bit of the sunset, just like that. I'm just going to soften that edge with my little paper towel. Very nice. So I'm going to stop the video here, and then when I come back, I'm going to paint in the palm tree and all of the ground and the little background. But I really want my picture to be super, super dry. So I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to do part 2 of this video.